Today on the Perception and Action podcast, how consistently do you need to move in order to be consistently successful in a sports skill? Is low variability in movement kinematics a key to achieving your goal? So it's time for a call to action. Hi everyone, this is Rob Gray from Arizona State University and PerceptionAction.com. Welcome to the Perception and Action podcast, where I discuss how psychological research can be applied to improving performance, accelerating skill acquisition, and designing technologies. In today's episode, I want to revisit one of my favorite topics, movement variability. Specifically, I want to focus on the question of whether low variability in movement kinematics, in other words, being able to produce a similar movement over and over, is necessary for good performance. This topic was inspired by a recent article published in the journal Sports Biomechanics that looked at movement variability in baseball pitching. I also want to review a classic study in this area by Bootsman and Van Wiernegem and a great book chapter on the topic by Carl Newell. But before doing that, we need to get into a little bit of discussion about exactly what we mean by the term variability. In describing the consistency or variability of an action, we can talk about a variety of different things. To illustrate, consider the example from the study I'm going to be talking about in a few minutes. A baseball pitcher throwing 10 fastballs at a target. First, let's consider task outcome variability. Here, we are trying to quantify the consistency of performance itself. The simplest way to do that, in this example I mentioned, would be to calculate the pitch location variance. That is, how much the pitch is thrown spread around the target location. Obviously, we want that to be low in this case. The pitcher is consistently hitting the target they're aiming at. But what about movement variability? Typically, we start by identifying one or more kinematic parameters we're going to measure. A good place to start with these are the ones that have been identified as being related to skill level in previous research. Again, let's use one from the study I'm going to talk about, lead elbow flexion angle of a pitcher. When using these, there are a few different decisions we need to make in terms of how to define variability. First, we need to decide how we're going to combine our different measures in our variability calculation. There are two basic options here. First, we could measure a kinematic variable at several points during the movement and use those values to calculate variability. What we're measuring here is within trial or within movement variability. So in terms of elbow flexion, we're asking how much does a pitcher's elbow bend during a single pitching movement. If they keep it locked in place, maybe reflecting an attempt to freeze degrees of freedom, we would expect low within trial variability. The other main option is to measure a kinematic variable once for each pitch, then use these values from the 10 pitches to calculate variability. This is between trial or between movement variability, which reflects the extent to which the pitcher uses the same movement on each pitch. If we are going to use between trial variability, we next need to decide at what point in the movement we're going to measure the kinematic variable. Are we going to measure elbow flexion at the start of the movement, when the pitcher releases the ball, its maximum value during the movement, or its average value for the whole movement? The point I'm trying to make here is that how we conceptualize and interpret measures of variability depends very heavily on what we are actually measuring, so we need to keep that in mind when looking at the study results. So let's look at the study I mentioned. This is a paper published by Glanzer and colleagues at ASMI. For this paper, they re-examined archival data that had been collected for other purposes. To quote, "The aim of this study was to characterize the relationship between variability in pitching kinematics and pitch location. It was hypothesized that lower variability in kinematics would be associated with increased consistency in pitch location." End quote. In the data, 47 male baseball pitchers threw 10 full-effort fastballs. The group consisted of 2 youth pitchers, 28 high school pitchers, 14 college pitchers, and 3 professionals. Vertical and horizontal coordinates of the ball as it crossed home plate were measured using the PitchFX tracking system. A motion capture system was used to measure 20 kinematic parameters in the pitching movement. These included 11 that occurred at the instant of foot contact with the ground. They were stride length, lead foot position, lead foot angle, lead knee flexion, pelvic rotation, trunk separation, upper trunk tilt, shoulder abduction, shoulder horizontal abduction, shoulder external rotation, and elbow flexion. 3 kinematic parameters were measured at the instant of maximal shoulder rotation, maximum shoulder horizontal abduction, and maximum elbow flexion. Finally, 6 kinematic parameters were measured at the instant of ball release: lead knee flexion, trunk forward tilt, upper trunk tilt, shoulder abduction, elbow flexion, and arm slot. Movement variability was defined as the standard deviation for each of these 20 kinematic variables measured across the 10 pitches. So we're talking about between trial variability here. To analyze the data, the authors performed an analysis called a backwards stepwise multiple regression, something that I've used myself in the past. Let me briefly explain what this is. In a stepwise regression, you're trying to develop a model or equation to predict or explain your dependent variable. In this case, the dependent variable we are talking about is the outcome variability measure, this variability of pitch location measured across the 10 pitches. For the analysis, we're trying to figure out which, if any, of our independent variables, which in this case are the kinematic variability, can explain or predict the dependent variable. Another way to think of it is like this. When the pitcher throws the ball, there are going to be some pitches that hit the target, some that are below it, and some that are above. In other words, there is outcome variability. The question we're trying to ask with a stepwise regression is there one or more variable that can partially explain this outcome variability? So for example, imagine that every time the pitcher's stride during the delivery was a little bit short, the ball went high, and when their stride was a bit long, the ball went low. If this were the case, then the kinematic variable stride length would partially explain the variance in pitch location, and it would be a significant variable in the regression model. In a stepwise backward regression analysis, all of the variables, that is the 20 kinematic variables in this case, are added to the model at once. Then variables that do not explain the significant amount of variance in the outcome variable get removed one by one. So what you have left is a model with a small number of variables. Okay, now that we understand the analysis, we can ask my favorite question, what was found? At the end of this regression procedure, 5 significant kinematic variables were identified. 3 of these occurred at the instant of foot contact, upper trunk tilt, shoulder abduction, and shoulder horizontal abduction. The other 2 occurred at the instant of maximal shoulder external rotation, maximum rotation, and maximum abduction. The model created with these 5 variables had an R-squared value of 0.58, which means that the variability in movement kinematics explained 58% of the variability in pitch location. More on that in a second. From these findings, the authors conclude, quote, "The results of this study suggest that the pitcher's ability to consistently locate the ball in the same position over home plate is directly dependent on his ability to pitch with consistent kinematics. Pitchers should strive for consistency in shoulder motion and upper trunk tilt in order to optimize their ability to locate their pitches." End quote. And quote, "Carefully designed training programs targeted at reducing variability in shoulder kinematics and upper trunk tilt may enable pitchers to improve control." End quote. So the authors of this paper are clearly arguing that the key to consistent success in pitching, at least in terms of control, is to have low movement variability. Well, if you're a regular listener of this podcast, you can anticipate that I don't really agree with this conclusion for a few different reasons. First, let's look at the amount of variability that was explained by the regression model. Using 20 different kinematic measures, so pretty much everything you can measure about pitching movement, the model only explained 58% of the variance in pitch outcome. So there's still 42% of the variance left unexplained. If consistent outcomes only depended on making consistent movements, wouldn't we expect the variance explained to be much higher? To me, the fact that these kinematic variables explain a moderate amount of variance in pitch outcome is exactly what I would have predicted. When we perform an action, we can't just move in any old way. There's a bandwidth in which we need to move in order to achieve a goal. Look at Bernstein's famous photo of the blacksmith. Yes, he's not producing the exact same movement with every swing of the hammer, but he's also not producing radically different movements with each swing. For example, overhand one time, then underhand the other. The combination of individual task and environmental constraints of any action constrain the solution space. Thus, for almost any action we perform, there's going to be some degree of between-trial consistency. If an action must fall within a bandwidth, the amount of movement variability possible is not unlimited. Therefore, we should expect there to be some relationship between outcome variability and movement variability, just not a super strong one, which is what was found in this study. Related to this point is something that was found in the paper that the authors never really discuss. Of the 5 significant parameters in the regression model, 4 were positively related to pitch location variability. So in other words, as the amount of variability in the kinematic variable increased, the variability in pitch location increased, as you would expect. But for one of the variables, the shoulder horizontal abduction at the instant of foot contact, there was a negative relationship. So in other words, higher variability in this shoulder parameter was associated with lower variability in pitch location. How does this fit in with the author's conclusion that the key to having good control is lower movement variability? It doesn't. Instead, it hints at the possibility of repetition without repetition and taking advantage of motor abundance. What can explain the differences between the author's conclusions and my interpretation here? Well, as I hinted at in the start of the episode, I think a lot of it has to do with the choice of the variability measure. Strictly looking at the between-trial movement variability measured at a discrete point in the action, like the foot hitting the ground, does not nearly give a complete picture. For example, it does not allow for the possibility of motor synergies. That is, that variability in one kinematic variable is related to the variability in another in a functional way. To do that, we need to look more closely at within-trial variability and use more complex analyses like the uncontrolled manifold analysis, which separates good from bad variability that I've discussed in past episodes. But next I want to look at a different way to conceptualize movement variability by reviewing a classic study in this area. The study I want to look at is one published by Boetsma and Van Wieringen in 1992. In it, they begin with the observation that fits with what I've been just talking about. Expert performers tend to have lower variability in both outcome and some movement variability measures than lesser skilled performers. That is when you measure between trial variability. The key, they say, is as it is still true today, is understanding how and why this occurs. Traditionally, consistency in performance has been put forth as evidence to support the existence of motor programs. That is, sets of instructions for movement organized ahead of its execution. A specific formulation of this idea, called operational timing, was put forth by Tidsley and Whiting in 1975. The idea here is that a simple way we could solve the problem of timing a complex movement is by pre-programming it to have a constant movement time. Quote, Tidsley and Whiting suggested that a synchronization between movement and visual information can be achieved by producing the same movement over and over again, that is to say with very little variation between drives, so that the expert player is facing only the problem of when to initiate the drive. It is clear that in this case of low variability drive, the player could wait until tau reaches some critical value, which would then serve as an initiation signal for the execution of the drive. Put differently, producing a consistent movement time reduces the number of degrees of freedom that have to be controlled in task space. End quote. However, Boetsma and Van Wieringen raised two issues with this idea. First is the problem of controlling the other aspects of an action than just timing. If we consider the act of making a forehand stroke in table tennis, the skill that was actually studied in their paper, then for an accurate high-velocity strike, this would require that the player very precisely control not only when the ball was struck, as proposed in the operational timing hypothesis, but also the angle of the bat at the moment of bat-ball contact. Using some calculations based on the size of the target area and the velocity of the hit, the authors showed that using a purely pre-programmed action would require that the timing be initiated with a precision of 6.5 milliseconds, which seems unreasonably difficult. The other issues the author raised is the one I just discussed with the baseball pitching study, the choice of variability measures. Previous research prior to this 1992 study had primarily looked at between-trial variability in movement time and the angle of the bat at the point of contact. So again, measuring at discrete points in time and not considering within-trial or within-stroke variability. The goal of the Boetsma and Van Wieringen study was to examine the forehand stroke in table tennis in more detail, to determine if indeed skilled players were using the same movement over and over, or if instead there was some evidence of continuous online control. In their study, 5 Dutch national players were asked to return table tennis balls as fast and accurately as possible onto a circular target that was 55 centimeters in diameter. Frame-by-frame analysis of films of the action were used to determine the different movement parameters. What was found? First, the authors looked at the between-trial variability of the parameters at discrete points in the stroke, like had been done in previous research. In doing so, they found the typical pattern, similar to what I described for the baseball study. Between-trial variability for expert performers is quite low, seeming to indicate the use of the same movement on each stroke. For example, the standard deviation of movement time ranged between 4 and 20 milliseconds, and the standard deviation of the bat angle at the point of contact ranged between 2 and 8 centimeters for the 5 players. However, the really innovative aspect of the study is that the authors went beyond these measures and dug a bit deeper into movement variability. The first thing they did was to compare the variability of the direction of the bat was traveling at the point of initiation of the stroke with the variability of this variable at the point of bat-ball contact. What should we expect to find in this analysis? If players are using a purely pre-programmed stroke that is not adjusted online at all, we would expect the variability at the point of contact to be slightly higher than at the point of initiation. This is because, after the action is started, motor noise would be introduced, and there's no way for the player to compensate for that. But as it turns out, this is exactly the opposite of what Bootsman Van Wieringen found. Variability at the point of contact was actually lower than at initiation, suggesting that the variance in the movement is functional, not just noise. When they looked at it in more detail, instead of just at 2 discrete points, they found that for all 5 participants in the study, the variability in bat direction decreased systematically from the initiation to the point of contact, as can be seen in the figures in the paper. In the discussion of the paper, Bootsman Van Wieringen made similar conclusions to the ones I was trying to make with regards to the baseball pitching study. Quote, "On the other hand, it should be realized that consistency is of course a matter of degree. Before dismissing the small trial-to-trial variations in movement execution parameters as noise, one has to make sure that such variations do not serve functional purposes. The present analysis did in fact reveal that the observed variance was functional. Thus, it must be concluded that for expert subjects of this experiment at least, a total reliance on consistent movement production is not feasible." So again, the point here is that the choice of variability measures we use can give us a very incomplete or misleading picture about how an action is performed and controlled. To finish off today's episode and tie this all together, I want to look briefly at a great book chapter on movement variability by Newell and James published in 2008. In this chapter, the authors begin by making the point I've mentioned several times in the podcast. In the field of human movement science, we have long had a history of focusing on the invariance of movement, what is the same between executions, while the variance, what is different, has been assumed to be no more than uncorrelated random noise that is a nuisance to be minimized as much as possible. Due to its presumed unimportance, variability has long been analyzed using very crude measures like the ones I've been discussing today, between trial standard deviations measured at discrete points in the movement. The authors also very nicely explained the point I was trying to make earlier with regards to there being some consistency in movements due to them having a certain bandwidth. Quote, "There is a movement form or invariance to the action that is present from repetition to repetition and trial to trial, even though each cycle also has some variance in the details of the kinematic trajectories. This invariance can be used to categorize the stability of the action and the perceptual labeling of a given movement activity class. For example, walking versus running versus hopping." End quote. They also describe how different measures of variability can give a very different picture of how movement is controlled. Quote, "The measures of the amount of variability at some discrete spatial temporal point of movement property can be contrasted with measures of the time or frequency dependent properties of the movement." End quote. These latter types of analyses have revealed that for several different actions, the amount of variability in the task outcome is inversely related to the dimensionality or the degree of structure in the variability. In other words, quote, "A lower level of task outcome variability arises from a more adaptive organization over the individual degrees of freedom." End quote. Or in other words, some functional variability in the movement. So returning to the question I started this episode with, how consistently do we need to move to be consistently successful in a sports skill? When we consider a broad range of measures of variability, the answer is somewhat. We can't run by walking. There is a bandwidth in which movements must fall, therefore there will always be some level of invariance or consistency. But there's also abundant evidence showing that not producing the same movement each time you act is functional, adaptive, and critical for successful performance. So in my opinion, the conclusions of this recent baseball study by Glanzer and colleagues are unwarranted and result from a very narrow view and assessment of the role of movement variability in the control of action. The key to being successful in your goal is not primarily due to the ability to produce highly consistent kinematics. Consistency or invariance is part of the story, but there's much, much more to it than that. Okay, that's it for today's episode. Remember, you can contact me at robgray@asu.edu or follow me on Twitter at ShakyWeights. To find out more about the podcast, please check out perceptionaction.com. Finally, to support the podcast and receive bonus materials, including an extra monthly episode and written transcripts, please head over to patreon.com/perceptionaction. This is Rob Gray from ASU. Cheers for now, and keep 'em coupled.